Hi guys, this is Luke Havard from lukehavard.com. Today I want to talk to you about a subject that's really close to my heart. Now, those of you who know me will know that I'm passionate about identity. That's something that I've coached thousands of people on, and it's something that if you don't understand it, one day you will wish you had. Now, today I want to tell you a story, because I think we've all got a story, and sometimes telling someone else's story can really help us to understand our own. Now, I've got a good friend who told me a story about a gangster, a guy that when he was growing up was the person who was the most infamous guy around his area. Now, this gangster had a great deal of credibility and respect, but he also had a lot of fear around his name. Now, so much fear, in fact, that he could pretty much do what he wanted. People knew who he was around the neighborhood. Wherever he went, people were afraid. He had earned respect. He had earned honor through fear, through commanding a presence of fear. Now, this guy, he was in with celebrities, he was in with famous people, and he could do whatever he wanted. And that's who he felt he was. That was his identity. He had built an identity, a persona around being the tough guy, about being somebody who wasn't afraid of anybody, who could achieve anything he wanted. He had the money, he had the cars, he had the women, he had the big house, and that's who he was. But one day my friend told me how, growing up at a certain point, there were certain generations who just really respected this guy, and they had such an honor for him. And there was a certain way that you did things, and there were certain ways that you didn't do things. Now, there was this new generation, though, that started to grow up. And they didn't think like this generation, the gangsters generation. They thought differently. They had a different kind of way of seeing things. They didn't have the same morals or the same values. And these young guys, they were coming up trying to make a name for themselves. And so it started that they would be picking on people around the neighborhood and starting fights with people. And the gangster could see this, and he thought that he would intervene one day. So he did. And this gang of young people kind of just laughed at him and said, who do you think you are? And he said, well, don't you know who I am? Who do you think you're talking to? And they said, we don't know you. And, he tried to assert himself, and they just didn't respond in the way that he was used to. So this really shocked the gangster, and he was confused, and he felt, put out, and he couldn't understand what was going on. So anyway, as time went on, he would keep running into these young people, and they would have these altercations, these verbal slanging matches, where he would try to assert himself. He would use the same strategy he'd always used: fear, intimidation, aggression. But they weren't intimidated, they weren't afraid of him, and they didn't have respect for him. And, he couldn't understand this, and he kept thinking, don't they know who I am? I've had men killed. I can do whatever I want. They should respect me, they should fear me. And he started to doubt himself, and he started to doubt the times that he was living in, because at the end of the day, he was older now, and he couldn't just fight like he used to fight, and he couldn't just go and get away with things because the authorities, they were a bit more aware now, and there was more surveillance about it, and so he kind of had to swallow a lot of his pride. So anyways, it came to the point where these young people, they knew where he lived, and they started to come and to, shout abuse at him from his house, and they started to throw insults at him and throw things at the windows and to try and call him out and to try and cause a fight. And so the gangster would come out and he would try the same tactics he had before, and he would say, don't you know who I am? You should have some respect. I've killed men. And they'd say, well, you haven't killed any of our friends. And, if you want to pick a fight, let's go for it. And he was completely shocked because he'd lost his authority. And these altercations would continue. The young people would come to his house again. This time they just, took it up a notch, and they started to throw excrement through his letterbox, and they started to set it on fire on his doorstep. And they would smear dog excrement all over his fancy cars, his Mercedes, his Bentley. And he would go crazy because he couldn't really do anything because he was so high profile and everybody knew who he was. And he felt like he was powerless. He's like, what has happened to me? Nobody would ever even look at me the wrong way in the past. And now these young people, they would do this to my cars. And he went back in his home and he talked to his wife, and he felt like he'd lost a part of who he was. And he started to doubt who he was. Now this continued, and he started to feel like he was going into a state of darkness where, his whole identity was on the line. He was older now. A lot of his old friends had gone. Time had moved on, and he didn't know where he fitted in society anymore. He didn't know what his purpose was. It came to the point that one day he wakes up to see his beloved pit bull had been set on fire and torched overnight. These gang of young people had set his dog on fire, and as a statement to say, we'll continue to push you as much as we can. And he knelt on the floor in front of this dog, that had been burnt alive, and he just thought, who am I? What can I do? I'm powerless. And he came to a place where he had just run out of options. He was a prideful man. He was powerful in his past. And for instance, the police were not somebody he would go to for help. And he thought, well, who do I turn to now? I can't even go to the police because that's not what I do. That's not who I am. And he just felt like he'd run out of options. So he took his own life. He committed suicide because there was nothing left for him. That person he was no longer had any power, no longer had a voice. And, that's something, for me, that it shocked me when I heard that story, because what I heard was that he'd lost his identity. In fact, I would suggest he didn't really have a solid identity. His identity was rooted in who he was to other people. He knew that he was feared. He knew that he was infamous. He knew that he was revered by people. He had respect. He could command authority because of his name, because of his reputation. So his identity was in his external reputation. Inwardly, he hadn't actually got a real solid identity. And that's something that I can say with full confidence, that there are many, many people out there in today's society, people from all ends of the spectrum, whether they be working class, middle class, upper class, whether they be bankers or building laborers, who really lack a genuine sense of identity. And it saddens me because, if we only knew that it's not what we do, it's who we are that makes us the person, then we could change this. Because we can see people who all their life, took their sense of identity from what they did. The doctor, the lawyer, the celebrity, the singer. But what happens when we're no longer associated to that? What happens when that no longer gives us power or gives us respect or makes us feel like we're worthy? What do we look to then? Now, this story talks of a few things. It talks about a loss of self-identity. It also talks about a lack of options and a lack of strategy. The gangster's number one strategy was fear and intimidation. That led to some sort of respect. Maybe not the right sort, but it was respect on some level. And he tried to use the same strategy all his life. And it really showed a lack of flexibility. And, I can tell you that for one now, that there are people that are in that same place. They've used their title to gain them, things in life, to gain them respect, to gain them honor, to have influence. But that's really limiting, because at the end of the day, we can't always be what we do. At some point we retire. At some point we might have to change jobs. At some point, the economy might basically decide for us. So who are we then? What have we got to offer then? So I want to leave you this final note, that I can bet right now that there are some of you that are watching this. You could be, someone of great influence, somebody who's in politics, somebody who's, had an incredible career. You could be somebody who really is just coasted in life and hasn't really been able to be successful in the world's eyes. But at the end of the day, if you are watching this and you're thinking, I don't really know who I am. If you took away what I do, if you took away who I'm married to, if you took away where I live, where I've grown up, I wouldn't know who I was. Then I want to really challenge you to go deeper, to investigate who you are. This is something I first did for myself, and I've now done it for thousands of clients who realized this in their own life. They realized that something was missing, that they'd missed something along the way, that society had sold them a lie. And, they realized that they had to figure it out quick. Because at the end of the day, if you have a sense of identity, and it's deeply rooted within you, it's not external, it's internal, then it doesn't matter what happens outside of you. It doesn't matter what people take away from you. You're still you. And you're strong, you're solid. And unlike the gangster, you have more options than you even realize. So look, I hope this has inspired you. I hope this has deeply shocked you and challenged you to take a look at your life and to ask yourself the question, who am I? Look, I want to really just ask you to go away, take some action with this, do something with this challenge I've given you, and I'd love to hear about what you find out about yourself. Thanks for listening, guys.